With me in the studio is Elizabeth Frankel. She's a lawyer and Associate Director of Young Centre for Immigrant Children's Rights, and Republican strategist Sari Kim, who joins us from Washington, DC. Thanks for joining us to you both. Firstly to you, Elizabeth. Now, we heard there in the piece that the Trump administration and the headlines are calling what's happening on the border a crisis. As someone who's navigating the legal system and the immigration system, how do you view this? Is it a crisis?
Ultimately, I think, a lot of the crisis is of the administration's own making. The administration has ended policies and practices that were in place that were working. For example, there was a program in place, it was called the Family Case Management Program, and it was a program that allowed families to be released from custody, and they would have a case manager who would support them and help ensure that they attended immigration proceedings and followed through with legal obligations. And that program had a 99% approval rating. And instead of continuing that program, which was relatively inexpensive, the Trump administration in 2017 ended the program and instead decided to start separating parents and children at the border and placing both parents and children in custody for very extended lengths of time.
And the separation of families doesn't just stop at the separation policy that Trump brought in over the last year or so. It also refers to the deportation of undocumented parents of American children. And like we just saw with Sylvia there, who is deported and has her American child in Mexico. What hope do people like that have of re-entering the US legally?
Oh, it's very, very difficult. And we see this a lot. And of course, right now, we just heard that the administration is planning to do more raids on families. And so, a lot more families are going to end up separated. We worked with a family about a year ago that was a family with 6 people living in a home. The government came at 7 in the morning, 8 ICE agents, and arrested 6 people. 3 of them were under 12 years old. 2 of the younger children had orders of removal from 5 years prior. They were 5 and 7 years old when they were ordered removed from the United States because they failed to attend an immigration court hearing. So these are, by all intents and purposes, kids who have grown up in the United States. They spoke fluent English, they attended school here, and yet now they face return to countries that they haven't lived in for many, many years.
Sari, I'd like to turn to you on a point here. Given that there are so many undocumented immigrants in the US that have had children, American children, on home soil, what purpose does it serve the US by deporting these parents?
First and foremost, it is the law. When President Reagan was in office, he worked with the United States Congress to create IRA. And if you commit a felony crime, you are deported from this country. 2, the issue of deportation and the enforcements of United States immigration law has been a persistent part of this country. When President Obama was in office, he deported more illegal immigrants than any other president, 2.9 million. President George W. Bush deported 2.1 million. President Bill Clinton deported 870,000. And between 1892 and when President Bill Clinton was in office, the United States deported 2.1 million illegal immigrants. And 3, as it relates to unaccompanied minor children, prior to President Trump being in office, there were approximately 10,000 unaccompanied minor children. Since he became president of the United States, there have been an additional 2,000. We have to focus on the fact that it is the Central American Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras that is responsible for the 1.5 million illegal immigrants that have crossed from Mexico into the United States since 2014.
Hang on, Sari. The largest number of illegal immigrants settling in the US each year are those who actually stay in the country and outstay visas. So there is a large focus on the border that the Central American countries are to blame here, but it's those who outstay their visas that actually make up the largest proportion.
Well, I'm not disputing your number about outstaying visas. I'm saying that we are focusing this conversation on the country of Mexico. But in fact, it is those Central Northern American countries of Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador who are coming to the United States, claiming refugee status, seeking asylum, and they are responsible for clogging the immigration courts.
Elizabeth, what do you say to that?
So a few things. First of all, there's nothing illegal about coming to the U.S. and asking for asylum. That is very much a legal process and something that is provided for in our immigration laws. Second, a lot of these individuals who have been ordered removed, you can be ordered removed in absentia, meaning that you fail to appear for an immigration court hearing. And in a lot of cases, these are young children and families who simply didn't know that they had to appear in immigration court. The notice to appear was sent to the wrong address, and so as a result, these families are ordered removed. So they didn't, in fact, have their day in court. And then the third thing I would say is that, the idea that these are mostly criminals is simply wrong. And under the Obama administration, while it's true that the deportations were at an all-time high, the difference was the individuals that were prioritized. And the Obama administration did not focus on deporting families, young children, the way the Trump administration has really placed such an emphasis on young people.
Now, we've seen a lot in the headlines about the state of the detention facilities in the southwest border. It's prompted Democratic lawmakers to scrutinise the Trump administration and how it's handling the surge. What has actually sparked this renewed interest and focus on the immigration detention centres?
Right. So by law, the children are only supposed to be held in Customs and Border Patrol stations for no more than 72 hours before they get transferred to facilities that are appropriate for children. And what has happened in the last few weeks and months is that children are being held in Customs and Border Patrol stations for much longer periods of time. Part of that is because Health and Human Services, the agency that normally cares for children, has had a backlog and has not been able to place children as quickly in beds. But as a result, children are spending time in these conditions that are just not at all, safe or clean or what a child should be exposed to.
We know now as well that Immigration and Customs Enforcement are stepping up raids. There are more people being transferred to these detention centres, yet there's a backlog. Sari, do you think that there has been an issue in terms of really thinking through the logistics here and not thinking about the conditions in which these people are being held?
Well, the number one issue that people should focus on is if they read the appropriation budget justification for the department who is responsible for this, they are short 16,000 Border Patrol agents. They don't have the staff. The United States does not have the staff in order to ensure these processes and procedures are going into place. It's like going into Istanbul on an airplane and having one person monitor hundreds of thousands of people getting off
But wouldn't that be the responsibility of the government to make sure that
work.
they've got the staff and resources in place in order to carry, their policies through?
Certainly, but the hiring issue in the United States government existed prior to President Trump. It was an issue with President Obama. It was an issue with George W. Bush. It is an issue with President Clinton. What you see is an exacerbation of it because these countries, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, these citizens in those countries are choosing to leave their countries as opposed to enforcing the rule of law, traveling 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 miles into the United States across Mexico, and then demanding that they be given conditions for asylum. That is not how the whole world works.
What do you say to that, Elizabeth? Do you think that the government have thought about the logistics of actually trying to deport these hundreds of thousands of people?
I think that the government has had plenty of time to think about this. It's not a surprise. It's not like the numbers are so much higher than they've been in the past. And I think to the point about there not being sufficient Customs and Border Patrol agents, what we're talking about in these facilities is just very basic care. Things like access to medical care when a child is very sick, toothbrushes, toothpaste, being able to sleep not on a concrete floor with a paper blanket. And you're talking about kids in these conditions for weeks on end. So we're not talking about huge expenditures of resources in order to meet sort of basic human requirements.
We touched on the idea of media earlier. Sari, I wanted to get your point here. Do you think that there's enough compassion around the human rights angle here? Do you think that the media is reporting the genuine truth of the situation of what people are actually going through in these detention centres and trying to cross the border?
I absolutely do. I think every American, every global citizen, every media person does at heart have a place of compassion, and they are reporting these stories because they feel sorry for these individuals. I myself feel sorry for these individuals because I was fortunate enough to be born to parents who came to the United States legally. But we have to remember there is a selective morality when you heighten the story of a child in Honduras and you forget there are 11 million American children here in the United States that go to bed hungry hungry every day.
There's also the question, though, Elizabeth, that perhaps there's not enough access to report correctly on this story. Is there a double-edged sword when it comes to compassion and morality, speaking in our ivory tower rather than actually reporting from the field itself?
I think that first of all, you know, it's important that this story is being covered and that it's being covered accurately, and that we are trying to tell the stories of the individuals we're working with to sort of help explain why people are coming to the U.S., that these aren't families that are trying to sort of take advantage of our immigration laws, but are really fleeing harm. I think that, you know, the media attention has brought a lot of pressure to bear on the administration and some of the policies that, you know, for example, the zero tolerance policy where separated children were, you know, sort of hundreds of individual children were being separated from parents, and it was really that, you know, media attention and then the public outrage that ultimately stopped the administration from doing what they were doing.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you both for a very interesting discussion. So as we move towards the presidential election next year, no doubt we can expect to be talking about immigration issues a lot more. Thanks to my guests, Elizabeth Frankel here in the studio and Sari Kim in Washington, and to the team here in New York. I'm Sally Ihan. See you next time on The Square.